What's up, guys? Welcome back to Jimmy Talks. Let's be extremely clear from the start. John Muhammad and Lee Malvo were not honorable warriors. They were sociopathic cowards, preying on the defenseless with the cold, calculated cruelty of disgusting vermin. Their actions were not acts of resistance, not expressions of an air quote cause, but pure, unadulterated terror for terror's sake. A killing spree that was fueled by hatred, delusion, and a warped view on life. They deserve no respect and no analysis that borders on admiration, and certainly no place in anything good. What this video is, though, is the cold and clinical study of how they operated and why they succeeded for as long as they did. This is not a glory story. It's a case study in exploiting systemic vulnerabilities, a stark warning about the dangers of operational sloppiness, and a lesson in how even the most incompetent predators can inflict massive damage when defenders and patriots are unprepared. We dissect their methods not to honor them, but to inoculate ourselves against similar threats. We study the enemy's playbook to rip out its most dangerous pages and ensure they can never be written against us. This video serves as a means to defensive intelligence gathering, the essential work of understanding the adversary. Now, with all that out of the way, I want to explain the origin story behind these two criminals to give some context to the story here. Muhammad's origin story is a textbook case of someone's life spiraling into a pathetic resentment for humanity. He spent 17 years in the army, primarily as a mechanic, but this provided him with basic firearms familiarity and a foundational understanding of military structure and discipline. This background ingrained in him the fundamentals of marksmanship, the importance of procedure, even if he later ignored it, which we'll get to, and a certain level of tactical awareness regarding movement and concealment. However, his military service ended with an honorable discharge, but he had multiple instances of behavioral issues, some severe enough for a field-grade Article 15 and reduction in rank. This pattern of failure, as well as his failed marriages, failed business ventures, and a profound sense of societal rejection, is what festered into a deep-seated rage. He wasn't fighting an occupying force like the training videos that I post. He was lashing out at a world he felt had denied him the status and respect he believed he was owed. His worldview was one of a paranoid conspiracy and entitlement, viewing society, particularly white people, as inherently hostile towards him. This was what all started his attacks. Lee Boyd Malvo now enters the scene here. He was a vulnerable 15-year-old boy who was orphaned and desperate for parental guidance. Malvo met Muhammad in Antigua in 2001, a small Caribbean nation. Muhammad had a small criminal job of smuggling people illegally into the U.S., and this is how he met Lee Malvo. Muhammad, recognizing the boy's malleability and also his isolation, inserted himself as a father figure, mentor, and ultimately a manipulator of the highest order. He isolated Malvo from his mother and smuggled him into the United States, and then started putting him to training, using an intense military-style indoctrination process and systematically rewired the boy's perception of reality. Muhammad presented himself as a revolutionary figure, like he was a victim of a conspiracy, and positioned Malvo as his chosen discipline in his personal and made-up war against society. Malvo's impressionability and lack of parental figures, as well as his desperate need for belonging, made him the perfect weapon for Muhammad's plans. Their bond wasn't partnership, it was psychological manipulation. Muhammad provided the ideology and direction, and Malvo, under duress and manipulation, provided the physical execution, and critically, the legal, plausible deniability Muhammad craved. A minor committing the acts could deflect immediate suspicion from the adult mastermind. This isn't to give way or leeway to Lee Boyd Malvo. It is rather to paint the exigent circumstances that he was placed under. Now, let's move on to how they planned the operation. Muhammad's final plan was not a coherent strategy. It was a chaotic mess of a homicidal fantasy, shifting constantly as his delusions expanded. At its core, however, was the desire to inflict maximum terror through randomness and impunity, which is what we will be analyzing. Anyways, he explicitly targeted white people, driven by his racist paranoia. Shockingly, he fixated on killing pregnant white women, viewing them as symbols of a future that he despised. His ex-wife, Mildred Muhammad, was a specific burning target in all of this because he had a personal vendetta against her for their divorce and taking the kids away from him. The theory in court after he was arrested that the police came up with was that Muhammad intended to use widespread, seemingly random killings across multiple states with different firearms as a deliberate smokescreen. The logic was this. Basically, if his ex-wife was murdered amidst a national killing spree, investigators could be overwhelmed by potential suspects and motives, making it far less likely they would immediately focus on him, the obvious estranged husband. This highlights a key, albeit crude, understanding of investigative psychology, creating noise to mask a signal. This is called link analysis in the Leo world. But Muhammad's ambitions were more than that. He demanded $10 million from the U.S. government as ransom to stop the killing, a demand that's honestly detached from reality. He had visions of escalating his terror into a multi-stage setup, with assassinating police officers, then attending their funerals to detonate IEDs, and finally planning secondary IEDs targeting the ambulances rushing to the scene. This funeral bombing concept reveals a disturbing grasp of exploiting societal rituals and the predictable response patterns of authorities, which is a tactic later seen with effectiveness by groups like ISIS, though Muhammad's version was amateur in comparison. One of his other, air quote, fantasies involved fleeing to Canada, recruiting and training at least 100 homeless people because they were seen as invisible and disposable assets, and unleashing them as sleeper cells across the United States. The critical point here for the warfighter is the absence of a coherent strategic motive. Muhammad's rage was personal, nihilistic, and not attached to any political or social objective. He wasn't targeting infrastructure, command posts, or logistics areas, which are the hallmarks of guerrilla warfare. He was targeting people indiscriminately. This randomness was actually his primary weapon and his greatest protection against investigations. Police are trained to look for patterns linking victims, like the victim's job, location, and associations, so the police were initially confused and couldn't find a way to figure it out. Robbery seemed to lack a motive, daytime shootings in parking lots defied the gang violence narrative, and the victims spanned ages, races, and locations. This lack of a discernible motive created a massive investigative barrier. How do you profile a killer who has no consistent motive beyond kill anyone, anywhere, for no reason? And force investigators down countless dead ends, wasting precious time and resources. We can contrast this with the typical guerrilla fighter operating against an occupying force. Their targets are almost always strategic, like fuel depots, communication structures, convoys, and administrative areas. The nature of the target itself provides immediate context, like it's an attack on the occupying force's ability to project power and maintain control. The motive is usually clear: expulsion of the occupier. This inherent logic makes the guerrilla's actions predictable in a way the DC snipers were not. Police hunting a sniper terrorizing random citizens face a near impossible puzzle, whereas military intelligence finding the guerrillas targeting supply lines can focus resources on protecting those high-value areas and anticipating attacks and their methods to conduct those attacks. The DC sniper case is a stark reminder. When the enemy's motive is pure, random terror, traditional investigations and defensive tactics can collapse under the weight of nothing. Let's touch up on their knowledge and how they trained beforehand, which was actually months before the attacks. It was a surprisingly accessible mix of legitimate training, movies, and video games. Muhammad's 17 years in the Army provided the basic foundation like marksmanship principles, familiarity with the M16 platform which directly informed his weapon choice, and an understanding of military procedures. This wasn't elite sniper training. It was a standard issue rifle qualification and basic soldiering skills. But it was enough to give him a dangerous head start over a completely untrained civilian. More alarmingly, and a pattern observed in other low-tech insurgent groups like the Taliban fighters in Iraq, they turned to readily available civilian resources. They went to public shooting ranges, legally and openly, to practice. Nothing suspicious there, just range time, which is normal for gun owners. But they weren't just plinking. They were drilling fundamentals, firing positions, and practicing rapid target acquisition under simulated stress. A surprising training tool that they also used was video games. Specifically, they played the original Halo game, using it to practice two-man fireteam tactics, communication and movement, even though it was in a video game in a sci-fi setting. They also studied sniper tactics in Hollywood movies, as well as actual military training videos. This highlights something in the modern information age. The barrier to acquiring basic tactical knowledge is not there anymore, and anyone can learn this stuff. The concepts of basic tactics like Overwatch, bounding Overwatch, use of cover and concealment, and even communication protocols are now embedded in popular culture and video games. While these provide a oversimplified and often inaccurate view of real-world combat due to them being a movie and unrealistic, or a video game where balance is needed, they do offer a starting point for the average untrained Joe. For individuals with even a modicum of real-world training like Muhammad, these sources can fill in the gaps and provide a framework for on-the-fly tactical thinking. The warfighter must recognize that the enemy may be self-taught using the same media that we consume, and their tactics, while they could be flawed, may still be effective at close range against unprepared targets. Physical fitness was another way that they trained. Both Muhammad and Malvo maintained fitness routines and healthy diets. This wasn't for ruck marches through the mountains, it was for the specific demands of their operation. Crawling into and out of a cramped truck, maintaining a stable shooting position for extended periods of time, and having the stamina to quickly move during escapes. It underscores a vital principle often overlooked by people. Operational success, even in a simple ambush, demands a baseline level of physical fitness. The ability to move silently, hold position, and react swiftly can be the difference between life or death. Now, let's move on to the weapon that they used for their killings, which was the Bushmaster XM15 .223 caliber rifle. Muhammad's army background made the AR-15 platform second nature. He knew its capabilities already. The .223 and 5.56 round offered significant advantages for their specific close-range mission, because they did not take far-away shots, as we can see from the reports of the homicide victims. It had minimal recoil for rapid follow-up shots, although they aim for one-shot kills, and it's also flat shooting, which makes your holdovers easier, and plentiful and expensive ammo, found in any gun store. The 16-inch barrel provided a good balance of maneuverability within the confines of their trunk hide and effective terminal velocity. The standard A2 flash hider, while not eliminating muzzle flash completely, did significantly reduce the visible signature somewhat in low-light conditions, which is a minor consideration they likely overvalued. The standard handguard, pistol grip, and aluminum 20-round magazine were chosen for compactness, as a 30-round mag would have been bulkier and unnecessary for their one-shot engagements. The collapsible stock was essential for fitting the rifle into the cramped trunk space and adjusting for different shooters, as Muhammad and Malvo had different heights and weights. Next, they put a Bushnell holographic on the rifle and a folding bipod. The optic provided a rapid target acquisition in the low-light conditions they often operated in, as most but not all of their shootings took place at nighttime, eliminating the need for precise iron sight alignment under stress. The bipod was used for stability from the prone position within the trunk, compensating for the sometimes unstable platform of a car. This combination prioritized speed and stability at very close ranges over long-range precision, which was suited for their operation. However, Muhammad's initial desires show a misunderstanding of practical ballistics and weapon design. His attempts to build a homemade suppressor, which he failed at, and his inquiry at a gunsmith about a rifle with a folding barrel show he fixated on the idea of a compact rifle that was also quiet, without grasping the weapon design realities. A true suppressor requires a little bit of length and specific internal design, while a homemade version is unlikely to be effective and can be dangerous when an amateur is trying to build one. A collapsible barrel, while making the weapon shorter for transport, will always lose accuracy due to barrel alignment issues, which is a critical flaw and a big no-go for a sniper weapon, even at moderate ranges. The Bushmaster XM15, while not ideal for long-range precision sniping, was actually a better choice for their specific close-quarters ambush scenario than a poorly made suppressed or takedown rifle would have been. Their choice, while flawed in concept, was pragmatic for their specific operation and for the actual distances they engaged at. The critical tactical lesson here is that weapon selection must be ruthlessly matched to the specific mission. Take into account the anticipated engagement range, required concealment, if any is needed, platform stability, in other words, where or what you're shooting from, and reliability. Chasing stealth features that compromise the function of your weapon like accuracy is a useless endeavor. Their stolen rifle, while not perfect, was good enough for the job that they were doing, which brings me on to my next point. The method of acquiring the rifle is an example of exploiting systemic failures, not sophisticated black market tradecraft. They didn't build it, they didn't buy it legally, which would have left a paper trail anyways, and they didn't get it through a criminal network. They simply stole it from a gun store called Bullseye Shooter Supply in Tacoma, Washington. This wasn't even a daring heist either. It was just an opportunity that they stumbled upon, and it was because of the store's shitty record keeping within their inventory. The ATF had previously documented over 200 unaccounted for firearms from the store's inventory in the preceding 3 years, and they cited grossly negligent practices. The store was known for its laziness, I suppose. This highlights a vulnerability, though. The black market, often anyways, isn't some shadowy, inaccessible underworld like they try to also say about Tor browser. It frequently leaks directly from the legitimate market through negligence and theft. Mohammed and Malvo didn't need deep criminal connections. They just needed to know through casual observation, word of mouth, or even public reports of the store's problem where lax security existed. This is what we call ground intelligence at its most basic, identifying a soft target through simple awareness. For the warfighter, this highlights the absolute necessity of accountability for your weapon and security within your supply chains, doubly so those with involving weapons and ammunition. Refer to my past video about the Minuteman logistics operation. But yeah, a single negligent FFL can potentially equip a bad guy, even if he doesn't mean to. It also means that monitoring known problem points in the legitimate supply chain is a vital intelligence gathering task, and my biggest examples of this would be with COVID and all of the shipping container stuff. The enemy isn't always sophisticated, is the point I'm making here. They often just take the path of least resistance. The stolen rifle provided near-perfect anonymity. Damn it, I can't say that word. Anyways, with no background check, there was no paper trail and no registration. Its only possible link back to them was physical possession at that point. Now, let's move on to their sniper's hide, or their sniper's nest, whatever you prefer, which is their most infamous thing that they did, and what they're known for is tactical innovation. And it was involved with the use of a 1990 Chevrolet Caprice as a mobile sniper platform. This wasn't a random choice either, it was a calculated choice as it offered urban camouflage and practical necessity. The Caprice was a common and regular car, and it was picked just for that reason. It wasn't flashy and it offered camouflage solely by just blending in with the local populace, which is a common method for the guerrilla warfighter as it is. Tinted windows were put on the car as well and provided concealment from random bystanders and casual observation. The large trunk offered plenty of space for a shooter to lie prone, and was another reason this car was picked. But probably the most important reason was the folding rear seats, which allowed the shooter to move between the rear seats and the trunk without exiting the vehicle. This was honestly a slick move, and it minimized exposure in their moments where they needed to leave rather quickly. It was vital for rapid deployment as well as escape. The wide bench seats was also another reason that they picked this car, as they pretty much lived entirely within the car during their spree. But what they did that was innovative was the hole cut above the license plate in the trunk. This served multiple purposes. It provided a clear and stable firing port, as the barrel of the rifle could be laid gently in the hole, and it also allowed the shooter to remain completely concealed within the trunk, and even more so, it contained the forensic evidence. The shell casings ejected during the firing remained inside the trunk, eliminating the most obvious physical evidence at the scene. Gunpowder residue and muzzle blasts were also largely contained within the metal trunk, significantly reducing the external signature. No shell casings, minimal barrel flash and smoke, and the sound dampening effect of the car's interior made pinpointing the source of the shot a bit difficult in urban environments filled with often loud and ambient noises. This was a crude but effective method of forensic countermeasures, or counterforensics. The shooters did not always shoot from the trunk, though. Sometimes they operated from natural cover a little bit of ways away from their vehicle, like in a patch of woods nearby they could find, while using radios like simple walkie-talkies for communication. But the vehicle was their primary and most successful method. It allowed them to strike from right in the heart of communities, blending in easily to the environment like parking lots, gas stations, and residential streets, which are also places where a person in the woods would be a bit suspicious. The lesson for the warfighter here is this. The enemy can be hidden in plain sight within the most regular and mundane objects of daily life. Vigilance must extend to observing behavior around ordinary vehicles, like unusual positioning, prolonged stationary periods in atypical locations, and signs of modification, not just looking for overtly suspicious individuals or objects. An example of this in real life would be a VBID, or vehicle-borne IEDs, as a common identifier of a possible VBID was the car's trunk sagging, as the explosives can be heavy and weigh the car down, which may be something the regular civilian would simply just overlook. Their shooting methods was dictated by the need for speed, silence, and certainty, not by the demands of long-range marksmanship. Operating almost exclusively at very close ranges, typically under 100 meters, they prioritized shots that guaranteed an immediate kill with a single round to minimize the time spent on their target and the risk of multiple shots drawing attention. As I've discussed in my urban warfare video, when you take a shot at someone, it's best to reposition afterwards so your location can't be identified. Anyways, for the snipers, this meant that they could be targeting the head, the spine, or vital organs like the heart and lungs. A shot to the spinal cord causes a nearly instant kill. A shot to the heart or major blood vessels causes rapid blood loss and incapacitation within seconds. These are called arterial bleeds. At these close ranges, with a stable shooting platform like a bipod in the trunk and an optic, hitting these small zones was easier, even for shooters without elite sniper training. The Army background and range practice gave them sufficient skill, and the kid Malvo, under instruction, could replicate the basics at close range. This focus on one shot, one kill was a tactical decision for operational security, not a marksmanship thing. It reduced the auditory signature, like one shot being harder to pinpoint versus multiple, as it minimized the time the shooter was exposed, and increased the likelihood of the victim being killed before they could react or identify the shooter's location. Think of Call of Duty or Rainbow Six Siege, or Tarkov, when someone calls out the enemy team location. It's a similar concept to that. The prevalence of head and torso shots in the victim's wounds was a direct result of this targeting strategy. It was efficient terror, not precision sniping. For the warfighter, this reinforces that enemy marksmanship standards are dictated by their mission, not by military doctrine. An attacker operating at 50 meters doesn't need sub-MOA accuracy. They just need to reliably hit a man-sized target under stress. Defenders and warfighters must train for the actual threat envelope, which often involves close quarters engagements where speed and target identification under pressure are paramount, not just long-range precision. I'm a big fan personally of a couple drills I'll throw out there for you all if you want something to do on your next range trip. 2 to the body and 1 to the head. Dummy rounds mixed within magazines to force a reload or a simulated malfunction, moving towards your target and shooting with your rifle and then transitioning to pistol, and last but not least, stress shooting, which is running and exercising with your kit on and then engaging targets on the move. Doing these drills upped my skills a lot, and when I first started doing them, it humbled me because it's way harder than you think. Now, as we all know, money runs the world no matter what, so these guys needed to finance their operations somehow, and this relates to guerrilla warfare. Sustaining their mobile sniper's hide required money. Their primary method was robbery, and most of the time it was armed robbery and a stick-up job, like stealing money and expensive stuff from victims immediately before or after killing them. This served a dual purpose for these pieces of shit, funding themselves for gas and food and eliminating potential witnesses. However, this introduced a massive vulnerability in their OPSEC. Robbery is a high-risk activity even without the added element of murder, as it highly increases the chance of encountering the police or a potential witness. This nearly got them caught multiple times. Police responding to robbery reports rolled up on them during or immediately after attacks. Even in one incident, Lee Malvo, the younger one, dropped his pistol magazine into his bag for evidence afterwards, while he was fleeing a robbery scene just as the police arrived, and this eventually aided in their capture. Their air quote logistics were unstable and dangerous, directly contradicting the guerrilla principle of minimizing contact with the population to avoid detection. A true guerrilla who is targeting military assets would ideally avoid civilian interaction altogether to maintain their anonymous profile within the local populace. Mohammed and Malvo's need for immediate cash forced them into high-visibility criminal acts that constantly put them at risk. Their recon, or reconnaissance, which means an observation of your target to gather intelligence or strategize an attack, was more methodical compared to their logistics. Before a shooting, they would often recon a location, like gas stations, parking lots, shopping centers, and they would assess foot traffic, sight lines, potential vantage points, and most critically for them, escape routes. They prioritized locations that were specifically near highway on-ramps, allowing them to melt into traffic and build distance within seconds of firing. This emphasis on escape and evasion is a core guerrilla warfighter lesson here, and they executed it after the shot. Their vehicle platform was designed for a quick getaway. This contrasts with their sloppy pre-attack recon, which they take position in the woods, like when operating outside the car. They left behind small shell casings, food wrappers, and other forensic evidence, which showed a lack of discipline in evidence control, or counter-forensics, which is a fatal flaw for anyone who is operating clandestinely. Counterintelligence efforts is something to be mentioned here, and they were rather rudimentary but effective for a time. They watched the local news, listened to the radio in their car, and read the paper to track police progress, understanding the developing profile the police had on them, like monitoring their BOWOs, or be on the lookout, and avoiding areas under heavy surveillance. They used a stolen laptop in one of the past robberies to print out physical maps for potential target areas. Gotta remember, this was 2002, So you couldn't just pull up Google Maps or Apple Maps like everyone does nowadays. But anyways, this is another focus point the guerrilla warfighter can look at. This consumption of open source intelligence, or OSINT, is a low effort but high reward tactic. It underscores that the enemy is listening to your communications and watching your actions. Operational security, or OPSEC, isn't just about hiding your own plans. It's about controlling the information environment around your investigation or operation to avoid feeding the enemy's situational awareness. Now, let's talk about how they avoided capture. Their evasion of capture for 3 weeks wasn't due to good tradecraft, but rather a perfect brewing storm that exploited investigations. The first reason is geographical dispersion. The killings spanned multiple states, all far away from each other. Washington, Oregon, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Maryland, Virginia, and then Washington, D.C. This created a barrier, as local police departments initially treated the shootings as isolated incidents, like a robbery gone wrong here, a random act of violence there. The idea of a single sniper team seemed implausible. Linking crimes across multiple jurisdictions is difficult, requiring communication, trust, and resources that often just don't exist between agencies, especially when they're multiple states away. For example, federal agencies try to big dick and boss around a city or a sheriff's office, or one might not share information with the other one because they want to be known as the ones who solved the case. It's a messed up ego thing, but anyways, chaotic movement across multiple areas was the camouflage, and that's why they got away with it for quite some time. And it's also how they got caught, is when they started localizing their attacks in one singular area. They also initially avoided capture due to using different weapons at times. They used not only the primary XM15, but also a .22 handgun and a 9mm pistol in some robberies. This further complicated the investigative picture. Was it a sniper, or was it a robber? Or a serial killer? The different ballistics and crime scene signatures pointed to a different possible people, halting the investigations significantly. The stolen AR-15 and any lack of paper trail was very hard to trace. Another reason why it was so hard for them to find initially was because of the, until they were found, a lack of motive. As we discussed earlier, the seemingly random and lack of pattern recognition slowed the investigations down. Was it racial hatred, gang violence, a serial killer, a robbery gone wrong, a terrorist cell? Who knows? And without a clear why, the police had a hard time building a suspect profile or anticipating the next target. The absence of a strategic objective made the actions make no sense, which is incredibly difficult to counter. Perhaps the biggest reason why they weren't caught was because of the vehicle platform. The 1990 Chevy Caprice, with its especially large trunk and folding seats, was a simple method of concealment. It allowed them to operate in broad daylight and even in crowded areas without drawing attention until the shot was fired. The contained forensic evidence also meant that crime scenes often lacked the evidence, like shell casings, which then have fingerprints all over them or even eyewitnesses that typically links shootings. The sound dampening of the trunk also made locating the source of the loud gunshot nearly impossible. Last but not least, they utilized open source intelligence, otherwise known as OSINT, that we discussed earlier. By monitoring what the police were up to via the news and radio, they could avoid hotspots like a large cluster of police presence. They could also understand the developing investigation and what information they had on them and adjust their tactics. Now let's talk about how they got caught. And their capture wasn't due to a detective's breakthrough, but rather because of their own operational failures. First up was sloppy forensic evidence discipline. The turning point for them came when they abandoned their use of the vehicle platform. During the attack that killed an FBI analyst in a Home Depot parking lot in Virginia, they were sniping from a patch of woods outside the car. Lee Malvo, either in the heat of the moment or through carelessness, left behind a big piece of evidence, a shell casing. Forensics teams got together and linked the shell casing to the earlier sniper attacks, definitely proving they were connected and providing a blueprint to work with, and this was also connected to the dropped magazine and the robbery from earlier. Not only was shell casings left behind too, though, they also left behind food wrappers at this specific crime scene and a couple others where they were shooting outside the car. This violated the most basic principle of clandestine operations: leave nothing behind. The contained evidence of the trunk sniper's hide was their strongest defense, and abandoning it to go shooting in the woods without maintaining the same level of forensic discipline was a huge lead for law enforcement. Next, they got caught due to their attacks being in a localized area. After the initial cross-country shootings, they got to the Washington, D.C. area for the final and most intense phase of attacks. While this allowed them to maximize terror in a concentrated area to give attention to John Muhammad, which is what he wanted because he was a sad little boy, it had the tactical effect of collapsing the geographical barrier that had protected them from investigations. Police in Maryland, Virginia, and D.C. were now dealing with a rapid series of nearly identical attacks in a relatively small area. The pattern then became undeniable that they were linked, and BOLO alerts could be more localized to specific areas. Resources were pulled together, task forces were formed, and the focus narrowed dramatically. The good guys finally had a lead, and we're going to take these fuckers out once and for all. I don't know. Thinking about kidding up to go after a domestic terrorist with no mercy just gets me hype and feeling patriotic. But anyways, the fact that they started shooting a lot of people in one specific area for an extended period goes against the basic rule of guerrilla escape and evasion. It allows the enemy to saturate the area with patrols, establish checkpoints, and gather intelligence. Reference my video on guerrilla logistics when I talked about how a stash spot being found by an occupying force not only took supplies away, it also increased enemy activity in the area. Next, we have a lack of operational security, and this one was the radio frequency tip. The next big thing for the capture of these vermin was a tip from an alert citizen. After the Home Depot shooting mentioned earlier, police issued a description of the suspect vehicle, stating it was a blue or black older model sedan, possibly a Chevrolet, and crucially noted that the shooter might have been using a radio and communicating with an accomplice. Remember how Lee Malvo shot from the patch of woods and they used a radio to communicate whenever vehicle ops weren't conducted? Someone saw this and noticed it. A gas station employee in Maryland, hearing this on the radio, recalled a blue Caprice that had been parked suspiciously at his gas station the night before. The driver had been using a radio, and he called the police for this tip. This specific, actionable tip, based on the one critical piece of information the snipers had inadvertently broadcast, which was being seen using a radio, is what helped them get caught. Always be vigilant, Patriots. There's some bad motherfuckers out there, and you need to be aware of the possibility of shit going down, no matter what you're doing or where you at. Now, let's talk about how they got caught. And for the end of the story, before we get to the key takeaways and lessons learned from these sick pieces of shit, is the moment they got caught. Police were dispatched and located the Caprice parked near a rest stop on I-70 in Maryland after a call from a civilian came through claiming he's got a possible suspect fitting the description. Trooper Smith of the Maryland State Police, God bless that man by the way, was the first to arrive at the scene and immediately used his lights, or as I like to call them, cherries and berries, and his unmarked patrol car to block off the exit by positioning the car sideways between two parked tractor trailers. As more troopers arrived, they were then able to seal off the rest area at both the entrance and exit ramps without the suspects being aware of the rapidly growing police presence. Later, a truck driver was attempting to exit the rest area. His tractor trailer was then asked to be used by the troopers, who then took the truck in place of the police car to complete the roadblock at the exit. While the suspects' escape routes sealed off, FBI SWAT officers moved in to arrest them. Following the arrest, and thankfully no one being hurt, upon searching the trunk, where Malvo had been sleeping, they found the Bushmaster rifle with a bipod, shell casings matching the sniper attacks with forensics linking the shooters together, the stolen laptop from earlier, maps of the D.C. area marked with attack sites, and other incriminating evidence. The stolen rifle was now irrefutable proof. They were caught red-handed, largely because they had concentrated their operations, abandoned their best forensic countermeasure, and left evidence that linked the crimes, making the citizen's tip actionable. Their downfall was because of operational security collapse, abandoning their sniper's hide for a sloppier one in the woods, leaving behind physical evidence, and concentrating operations in one area, and making a critical mistake of being spotted using radios and acting suspicious by an eyewitness. To be quite honest, luck also played a role with the observant gas station clerk, but it was their own errors that created the opportunity for them to get caught. And good riddance. Now, key takeaways for the guerrilla warfighter. Now, finally, let's discuss the key takeaways we can take away from these guys as defensive preventative measures to keep our country safe. And before I continue on, let me clarify again that this video is purely for educational purpose and in no way, shape, or form should be recreated. And if you do this, you're a piece of shit and I hate you. Let me clarify here that studying John Muhammad and Lee Malvo is not about copying them or even liking them. It's about understanding the vulnerabilities they exploited so we can clean them up, and recognizing the fatal flaws in their approach so we can avoid them. Here are the lessons for the serious guerrilla warfighter. The first one is the mobile sniping platform. Their use of the Chevy Caprice demonstrates the immense value of urban camouflage. A common vehicle, especially one modified for concealment with tinted windows and functionality like trunk access, is a near-perfect mobile operation platform in populated areas. We must understand that people can and will exploit ordinary objects and environments for concealment and operation. A delivery van, a construction vehicle, and even a common sedan can be a possible tool. However, don't assume it makes you invisible. Maintaining strict discipline within the platform is paramount as well. The platform is only as good as the discipline of its operators. Their mistake was abandoning it. Next, geographical dispersion was their force multiplier and investigative barrier. Their initial cross-country movement created a massive investigative barrier. It's a shame they couldn't get caught quicker, and rest in peace to all the affected victims involved. But the lesson here is this. Strategic dispersion across a wide area, especially across large areas like nationwide, and it's a powerful tool to confuse and overwhelm the defenders. It forces coordination challenges and resources that soon become diluted. However, dispersion must serve a strategic purpose, and for example, hitting strategic opponent areas simultaneously. Muhammad's dispersion was random and pointless, serving only to delay, not to achieve an objective. More critically, never disperse haphazardly. Maintain a clear operational plan. Know when dispersion is necessary and when concentration is required for a decisive blow. Muhammad's fatal error was shifting from dispersion, which protected him, to concentration, which doomed him, without a tactical reason beyond escalating terror. Dispersion is a tactic, not a permanent state. Do know how to transition between dispersion and concentration seamlessly and with a purpose. Next was the motive. Their random terror created investigative chaos, but also made their actions strategically meaningless and ultimately self-limiting. The lesson here to this is this. For effective guerrillas, motive must be clear, strategic, and tied to tangible objectives. Targeting military infrastructure, supply lines, or command structures provides an immediate, understandable context for your actions. This clarity, while making you predictable to a degree, also builds legitimacy within your support base and focuses your efforts on crippling the enemy. Random terror against civilians obviously destroys local support, unites the enemy population against you, and provides no strategic gain. It turns you from a resistance fighter into a common criminal or a terrorist, inviting overwhelming retaliation. Muhammad's motive was his greatest weakness. The guerrillas' clear strategic motive is their greatest strength and shield. Never sacrifice strategic purpose for the sake of terror. Next was weapon traceability. The stolen rifle further delayed investigations because of the lack of the background check and no financial records. Weapons used in operations must be untraceable to the operator through legal channels. This means your absolute priority is sourcing from secure, deniable channels like captured enemy weapons, dedicated insurgent production with no records, extremely reliable black market sources with no digital footprint, and we've seen this a lot with the IRA and the Troubles. We've seen it with them in Chechnya, and we've seen it a lot with ISIS in Iraq. It's something to be aware of. Next was reconnaissance. Their pre-attack recon of locations and escape routes was sound. The lesson here was never conduct an operation without thorough, on-the-ground reconnaissance of the target area, egress and ingress routes, and potential obstacles. Know the terrain, the patterns of life, and the enemy's response capabilities. However, their catastrophic failure was in forensic discipline during recon and execution outside the vehicle. The lesson here is operational security extends to every aspect of the mission, including the most mundane things. Never leave behind any evidence, like food wrappers, footprints, tire tracks, digital footprints. Assume every piece of debris is a potential link. The military does this all the time, with everything from MRE wrappers to taking a shit in a hole. Maintaining OPSEC religiously, whether operating from a vehicle, in the woods, or in an urban alley, one thing can ruin everything. Discipline and attention to detail is key. Next up, intelligence is a two-way street. Their use of news and radio to track the investigation was key for them. The lesson here was to actively monitor communications, the news, social media, and the radio to understand progress, suspicions, and tactics. Adapt your operations based on this intelligence. Crucially, understand that you are broadcasting information too. Another lesson here is to rigorously control your own OPSEC. What information are you leaking through your actions, communications, or even your lack of actions? A suspiciously parked car, Unusual radio traffic or a sudden concentration of activity are all signals. For anyone on here who's Leo or an NCO in the military, I want you to tell your guys when you're training next time, train your guys to think like the enemy. What would I look for if I were hunting me? Close those gaps. Never assume your actions are invisible. Next, logistics must serve the mission, not compromise it. Their reliance on robbery for funding was a critical vulnerability. The lesson here: secure and deniable logistics are essential. Funding should come from secure external resources, community support if applicable, or operations that directly support the mission, like capturing enemy supplies. Robbery for personal sustenance is high risk, attracts unwanted attention, and destroys any claim to legitimacy. It forces interaction with the civilian population, increasing the chance of detection. A guerrilla force must have a sustainable, low-vis logistical trail that doesn't create new threats. Never let the need for cash or supplies compromise operational security. Now, to wrap everything up, John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo were not tacticians. They were predators who stumbled into a temporary advantage by exploiting systemic gaps and their own capacity for cruelty. Their so-called success was fleeting, built on nothing, and ended in utter failure due to fundamental operational sloppiness and a complete lack of strategic purpose. They are a warning, not a model. We study these monsters not to learn how to be like them, but to ensure we never become vulnerable to tactics like theirs. We dissect their methods to build better defenses, to instill greater discipline, and to understand that the most dangerous enemy is often the one who exploits the gaps we didn't know existed. Vigilance isn't just about watching the horizon for the obvious threat. It's about understanding the shadows cast by the evil vermin before us. Guys, that about wraps up the video for today. Subscribe to my Patreon if you want to support my work. Bitcoin and Solana addresses are also in the description below. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to this. Jimmy Talks out.